Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 77th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the book Love in Colour by Bolu Babalola for Valentine's week. And I'm so excited about this. Now, this is something different. This is a little bit different. I'm not specifically, I will get to it, of course, talking about mental health, mental well-being and global majority diaspora women. But I wanted to share some joy because this book has brought me a lot of joy during the January lockdown. And we actually read it for our book group. There were kind of mixed opinions. Some people thought it was really light and fluffy, but for me, it's pivotal for lots of different reasons. And given that it is Valentine's Day, and I know I said in episode 75, which is all about love, Valentine's Day, mental health and connection, some of you might detest it, you might loathe Valentine's Day. I'm actually quite a big fan, only because it's something kind of fun in the middle of winter and my favourite colour is red. So that sounds really trite, that sounds really trivial, but this book isn't. And I thought it was a really good way to, I think, talk about some of the topics through this beautiful work of fiction and global tales. And I wish I knew the author. I'm going to tag her into everything and hopefully she might see that I'm talking about her book, but I'm by no means the only person that has reviewed this. And there's some great reviews on YouTube and lots of commentary. And I've also included a link in the show notes to one of her interviews that she did for Refinery 29, which I really enjoyed reading. So this book it retells myths from around the world where global majority diaspora women or global majority women, Black global majority women are seen, raised and represented, and why this is so important. It also shines a new matriarchal feminist light on the original stories. So she's rewritten them for the modern day. And for me, the reason why this really resonated is as a child, I was very lucky that my parents did read to me. And one of the core things that were read to me were international folk tales, global. So from India, from the continent of Africa, from China, from Afghanistan, I used to get read all these different tales. So for me, it was a real slice, and some of the stories I did recognize and how she'd rewritten them. And this was really a key diet to me, learning and knowing more about culture. So it was a real treat, escapism and joy. Now, I don't know whether you like to read, whether you read fiction, because I know some people just prefer reading biographies or non-fiction books, but there is lots about stories, particularly in Black and global majority cultures, how stories really teach us, how stories are learning. They're not simply something to entertain. Of course, they do that, but they're a lot more than that, and stories are very, very healing. In fact, for Aboriginal communities, I know that there's some amazing therapeutic models that have been developed around storytelling and people's connection to the land, and how land was taken away from them, has been taken away from them, continues to be taken away from them, and the kind of connection to nature and how there's a lot of healing through stories. So it isn't simply, for me, it wasn't just, it was a great book. It wasn't just fiction. It was thinking about the lessons that we can learn. And for me, a lot of it was challenging stereotypes. You might have heard me talk about the white gaze. So the white gaze is around who gets to be seen, how their stories are told, how they're untold, and who might retell them, and how they're often told in a viewpoint of white majority viewpoints. And I think many years ago, if I'm not mistaken, I couldn't find it, but that Riz Ahmed, the actor and performer, commented about the fact that he would know when he had really truly made it, because he wouldn't be playing the terrorist anymore, words to the effect of, and he would be playing the main love interest without this huge furore and commentary about it. And so this is why I think this book was so important. I think the title's very clever, Love in Colour, because not only are the scenes and the descriptions incredibly colourful, but we are seeing women of colour, global majority Black women in the forefront, as they rightly should be. We're seeing stories retold from different perspectives as well, from parts of Nigeria that are linked with Yoruba culture to other parts of West Africa, Ghana, parts of the Gambia, Lesotho. So it's big, and it's not this horrible stories that we are enforced to see in a lot of traditional media around an entire continent, which is enormous. landmass is enormous. This one single story about the quote unquote African experience, in Africa, as if the multitude of countries are one place. Because of course, if you go from Egypt and Morocco, through West Africa, through Central Africa, through Southern Africa to South Africa, we are talking a multitude of cultures. And I think what I really love about this book is it really hones into the specific different cultures, the different peoples, and Bolu talks about this. So that's really, I think, useful and important to get us thinking about not lumping people together, which I often mention. I think too often in the media, in magazines, in books, that we are invisible, and I'm putting myself in this, and I know that there's a very different picture depending on if you identify as being South Asian, Southeast Asian, of African heritage and descent, and I mean the whole continent, of South American, and I mean the whole continent descent, also Arab cultures, and I mean the plethora of cultures there when I talk about the Middle East and identifying as being Arab. We are missed out, or we are cast as impoverished, traumatized, having no agency, not being able to move forward in our lives, needing someone white or from the global north to come and rescue us. And this simply isn't the case. And I think this book really beautifully illustrates that. Now, there was pushback in my book group because a number of the readers felt that it was very predictable and all the stories ended very happily ever after. But to me, I think that was absolutely the point, and it was so important that the stories ended in a particular way. And I don't want to spoil it because it shows really that there are happy endings, that we have agency, we have autonomy as women from global majority backgrounds, as Black women, as Middle Eastern women, as South Asian women, as the whole gamut, because we can make decisions, we can decide, we can choose love, we have control over our bodies, we can give our bodies or not give our bodies, or choose how we do that. And that to me really came across in the book around agency. And also just the imagery, wow, there are wealthy people in the whole continent of Africa, shock horror. Now that sounds like a very glib statement to make, but I think because of the images that we see, and not everyone gets to travel there or wants to travel there because of this, the PLC image pushed out about the whole entire continent of Africa. This book has, again, really exploded those things for people who may not be aware, in the way that the scenery is described as well. It's not all a comic relief vignette. Now, it's really important. I'm not doing a disservice to the work that Comic Relief do, but when we see the images, and we see completely different images here, we see pool parties, we see beach parties, we see lavish banquets, we read about beautiful houses. When I say see, I guess see in our mind's eye. And it's so important that we educate ourselves in different ways. So we've got the other resources that I've shared with you in previous episodes. But for me, this is another way of using storytelling to educate ourselves, that it might be quote unquote fantasy. I think some myths are obviously based on some truths and they get carried through. How oral storytelling is also very important. We also have a reimagined Greek mythology in there as well, which I think is brilliant for the modern day and how things pan out for people. And I also think at the moment positivity is so important, and I was really grateful for the stories being so uplifting and so joyous. And going back to last week's episode where I talked about self-esteem and self-love, the two things really tied together for me in this book. So self-esteem around confidence, how people view themselves, how they see themselves having agencies, the female characters, and also the way in which I think masculinity can be portrayed. And many of the male characters in a number of the stories are incredibly supportive. They championing their potential partners, their partners, and how they are empowering women to be their best selves or to be in the space that they want to be in. So I thought that was really interesting around the self-esteem and the kind of agency and the career thread that runs through a lot of the characters and how they've achieved in different ways. There might not be traditional careers as we think about them, or traditional ways of doing things. And I think that was really, really positive. And then self-love in terms of really paying attention to themselves and having made decisions to look after themselves and put themselves first. again, in a number of different ways. And we also see different generations or different people doing things in different ways and really valuing themselves. And that also really comes across quite clearly, which I think in a book like this can be difficult to convey, but it's conveyed very, very beautifully. The aspect of different cultures and how they're conveyed and retold and rewoven. They might shake up some of our perceptions around culture as well and what that means. The thread of warrior women, and I don't want to spoil that for anyone either. So that I think is incredibly positive. So it's a little bit different this episode, but I felt it was very important to just talk about this. So in terms of how people are seen and what's shown, and this isn't actually flipping it on its head in a way. What it's doing is showcasing what's real and showcasing the original history. The thing is that Black history in its widest context does not start with slavery. Black history starts with Angolan queens. It starts with Nubian dancers. It starts with celebrations, it starts with colour, it starts with autonomy. It does not start with these stories that we're often told in the West. And I think this book really acknowledges that women of all global majority backgrounds do have autonomy, they do have agency, and this book does a fantastic job of doing that. It's a joy to read, it's really uplifting in a time when a lot of us are feeling really low and struggling. And it also reflects on modern life in a very interesting way, again, with representation, with people that don't necessarily get seen in books and films and magazines, and the way it showcases beauty. So inner beauty, kind of strength beauty, and the descriptions of hair I really enjoyed. When people are talking about the foods that they eat and the joy that it brings and the richness that it adds. So I hope you found this useful, and please do check it out, Love in Colour by Bolu Babalola. And I'd love to know your thoughts, and also the link to the show notes with the article. And don't forget to subscribe to my bi-monthly newsletter if you're interested, where I share sort of similar tidbits to this and what's coming up. And also this might make you think about going back to the previous episode and this episode about self-love and self-esteem, or looking after oneself. And maybe you've been thinking about coaching and the kind of coaching that I do, working with global majority diaspora women to achieve their goals and also look after their health and well-being. So do check out the link on coaching to see if it's right for you. And if I'm not the right person, I can assure you there are lots of amazing coaches out there. So you might want to check out the VAME Coaches Directory. So please do take care, and sort of happy Valentine's Day, or Galentine's Day, whether you celebrate or not. And I'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.